Okay, hi guys. So this week we're tackling the political economy of development topic. We're gonna have like three lectures. So you will have like the first makeup lecture this week, and then next week on the uprisings. You're gonna have one more. So basically, I divided the three lectures according to kind of thematic topics. So I list the readings I use to structure my lectures, because it's kind of I combined week 12 and week 13 because of the shift of the spring break and the Easter break. So if you remember, we examined in some detail the processes of state building, the post-colonial state, but we actually investigated how like one dominant party rule, for example, in republics, um, managed to establish like authoritarian leaders managed to establish themselves through one party rule, and in monarchies as well, how families managed to assert like their dominant position, like in absolute monarchies. And but we didn't tackle like the economic policies, or what kind of development models these leaders adopted or embraced in order to secure funding, or encourage or stimulate investment in order to modernize or to reestablish the state's economy. So we touched upon the impact of the oil, and how like the oil helped with the cementing the power of the ruling families. But we didn't we're going to talk about this in the next lecture in some detail, but we didn't like Nasser and Boumediene in Algeria, for example. We didn't like explain in some detail how what kind of economic policies they enacted in order to like sustain or to legitimize their grip on power as well, because it's not only about ideology and in institutional configuration. So they have like to provide some to provide their people with some basic goods, or to meet their demands. So basically, the republics, or like the established the one dominant party role in the post-colonial state, they like they embraced the import substitution industrialization model, wherein the state actually played the most, or the most important, or the significant role. So like the inherited kind of with some variation across the region, but generally speaking, like if you remember, like the heritage of the Ottoman Empire, and then the colonial authority with like different variation as well, because the British authority, for example, they depended on tribal leaders in order to stabilize. The British authority actually governed or ruled indirectly, and the dominant sector, or the predominant economic activities, were agricultural activities basically. And they didn't help with transferring the technology or modernizing agricultural sectors. So the post-colonial leaders actually inherited this kind of deteriorated or agricultural communities or agricultural sector, and they needed to reestablish or to improve the productivity of the agricultural sector. And because the colonial authorities as well, they didn't care much about educational policies, except for somehow Algeria, because they had this assimilation policies. But like as a general pattern, they didn't care much about educational processes. So actually they didn't have the post-colonial leaders had to invest in education as well, in order to create a skillful or a skilled workforce. and to modernize the agricultural economy. That actually it got like, it was like forced to get integrated into the international market or international division of labor, but it was like totally dependent on the international market. So they basically, the military regimes of the post-colonial states, they believed in like the heavy interventionist role of the state, at the state like as the main, or if not the only player that had the capacity, or that was like qualified in order to mobilize resources and to allocate scarce resources. So they had like different motivations and different strategies. So they adopted kind of two processes of capital accumulation, or they had like towards like the private sector. So it's to go alone or to go like in collaboration with private sector. So initially, or like in Egypt, for example, they took it like, gradually. So the state intervened, and they had like, this thought like, about state intervention just to provide for like the public goods or infrastructure like roads and ports or electrical power, to stimulate economic activities, or to offer some raw materials for basic industries, and to offer them kind of other incentives like cheap credit, or some protective measures or legislation, in order to encourage them to invest in the industrial sector. And then the state would transfer the surplus or the profits, and any kind of earning to the private sector, in order to minimize the risk for the private sector. And then that was like, some political leaders took initial steps with some variation, again, as we are going to see, because some countries, they didn't have this indigenous entrepreneurial bourgeoisie, so they didn't have like the settlers, or they didn't have like this capitalist development in the pre-colonial state. And then Al-Nasser actually led the wave, and the state the state intervened to provide the infrastructure, or like some protective or stimulating measures, or the state itself to undertake the action of resource mobilization, and it did through like nationalization and confiscation of some private assets, and transfer of some assets, as it happened in Egypt after the socialist decrees in 1961. That was like the gradually dropped under Sadat, when he embraced or undertook infitah and open policy measures, and in Tunisia as well, like after independence from 1964 till 1969. So like gradually, with some variation across the countries, the post-colonial leaders tried to marginalize private sectors, and for different reasons. Like, as I mentioned, some countries, they didn't have this domestic capitalist class. They didn't, so that this kind of private sector was financially weak, and in some other countries, they had like they had like the powerful merchant classes, but they focused mainly on commercial and trading sector, so they didn't really bother, or they didn't care about industrialization. And because of like the narrative of the post-colonial state, that had like this like the main narrative of like economic independence of the Western countries, or to achieve like national autonomy and economic independence. So the if the private sectors or domestic bourgeoisie, they had any kind of links with the metropolitan, what kind of they had like some economic ties with them. So the state, or the political leaders in the post-colonial state, actually they were worried about the very existence of the private sector, in order to undertake what they aspire to, in order to achieve like radical social transformation, and to implement this import substitution industrialization. And actually Turkey, it did like set the as like the paradigmatic case of the import substitution industrialization. So we talked about Nasser and like Arab socialism, but they actually replicated the Turkish experience of import substitution industrialization. We are gonna talk about Turkey more in the very last week, but for now we need to know like what Ataturk actually did in regard to economic policies, or in regard to this economic experiment of import substitution industrialization. So so after like the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, like the Ataturk, undertook this sweeping reform measures by abolishing the caliphate and secularizing, the establishing a republic with like secular orientation. And he tried as well to diversify the economy and the industrial sector, in order to achieve again this economic independence, and to achieve like rapid economic growth and expanded educational system. So he in 1931 he issued this manifesto that combined the principles of statism, populism, and revolution. So statism, it was mainly to legitimize the strong or the heavy intervention of the state in the economic domain, or economic activities, in regulating and planning and directing and guiding. And then like populism, it meant that like the masses were the main object, or the like of any economic and social policies, and the main target of any redistribution or redistributive measures as well. And then revolution, and it actually came from his rejection and his secular ideology, his rejection of the legacy of the empire, and the enactment of this new secular oriented education and secular oriented institutional setting. And all these like pillars or principles, they were embodied in the Constitution of the Republic of 1937. And within like few years of the manifesto, the like Ataturk and Turkey, led by one party called the Republican People's Party, RPP, it embarked on this economic experiment of import substitution industrialization. So the main purpose was to promote industrialization, and to liberate Turkey from the dependency on the Western powers. So like before like the declaration of the Republic, or before that manifesto, some efforts actually were taken in order to give like some role to private sector, or to give like some initiative position to the private sector. And the they established, the business bank in order to create indigenous, or to lay the groundwork for creation of the indigenous capitalist class. But actually, Ataturk, or Kemalist revolution actually reversed, the this initial thought, or like emerging experiment of creating indigenous capitalist class. So in 1934, um, the Turkey adopted, this first 5-year plan. So the state actually had to plan, where to allocate resources, where to invest, and how to distribute the surplus and the profits, if any. So in 1934, they declared, or like, they initiated, the first 5-year plan, and they focused basically on textile industrialization, that they had, like, advantage, on to utilize, the Turkish cotton. So they needed, to push for textile industrialization to gain kind of economic advantage. And in addition to this, like, the focused on, like, other, like, economic or industrial sectors, like sugar refining or food processing, and like heavy industries, or projects like, iron and chemical and steel projects. So it was like mainly a coalition of left of center figures led by, Kemal Ataturk. And they actually abandoned, as I mentioned, this private sector strategy, and they established the state bank, or like a national bank, in order to supervise, all the public sector or the state-owned enterprises, in order to plan, to supervise, these projects, or these enterprises, and to plan for to plan new projects, and to invest, in some others. So in after, like, the end of the first 5-year plan, so by 1939, so the state actually, the state, the bank, the national bank, the holding of the national bank actually accounted for roughly 100% of production in some sectors, like iron, steel, and silk, and from, like, 90 to 70% in some other sectors, like shoes, papers, and other heavy industries. And so in the second 5-year plan, in the regime, or the government, tried to deepen industrialization by pushing for more heavy industrial growth, like steel, and coal, and chemicals, and like, marine transport. So they focused. They wanted to give, like, a big push for this heavy industrialization, but it got interrupted by the outbreak of the World War II. And the main, or the as we're gonna see, like, the most important shift happened after the war, was the emergence of a new party, the Democrat Party. So it actually initiated or established this two-party system in Turkey. And the Democrat Party, the Democrats, they had, like, different economic orientation. So they had this liberal orientation, like liberal economic policy, to actually to liberalize, the aimed at liberalization of the economy, and minimizing or downsizing the state, the role of the state, and to create, a more, like, domestic or indigenous industrial bourgeoisie. So they had, like, initial plan of selling off some public sectors, or some, like, state-owned enterprises, but it was, like, totally abandoned again, and the state actually continued to invest in some public enterprises, and it increased actually its share of the public sector in total investment from 30 from 38% in 1952 until 62% in 1959. So obviously, the Turkish regime managed to go through or to push even further for import substitution industrialization. So some sort of like Turkey, is notoriously known for military coups. So in 1960, it was like a brief military takeover. So it was like another, and it led to another period of national planning. But they had like a new emphasis on investment, giving some space for private sector investment. But like the again, like after this brief period, the RPP came to power, or like they restored the control over power, and they continued the most investment to they directed most of the financial resources to state sectors. So it actually Turkey led or established kind of a base benchmark against which the some other import substitution industrialization could be compared against. But like it achieved it successfully managed to make it through before reform liberalization measures in the 80s without any kind of exhaustion or severe economic crisis. So so the Arab countries tried to replicate what Turkey initiated, the Turkish experience. So the Egypt, for example, they started like Nasser or the Free Officers regime started its first 5-year plan in 1960. But before, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in this class or not, but right after they took over power in a few months, the Free Officers actually undertook some land reform measures. So they actually confiscated some of the lands in order to redistribute some of the agricultural or some of the assets to undermine the power base of the landed elites in the rural areas, especially it was considered as the stronghold for the Wafdists, or the dominant class that dominated the political landscape after 1919. And in order to meet this social justice demands or rhetoric, but the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company in 1956, it initiated or offered stimulated further rounds of nationalization and asset sequestration. So the Nasser briefly nationalized some of the pre-existing industrial sector, most especially Mr. Group, and established a new minister of industry, and the ministry actually was empowered to license and regulate all the private industrial activity. And he streamlined as well, or the Free Officers the regime streamlined the all the industrial sectors and brought them under one single umbrella in order to tighten the state, in order to tighten its control over industrial sectors. So the socialist decrees in 1961 actually enabled the regime to continue with what the regime already started before, throughout between 1956 until 1961. So the first 5-year plan actually was declared without any kind of deliberation or discussion with the private sector. but they actually forced the private sector in order to mobilize, about 55% of all of the investment before, the before the decrease. So the actually, sorry, after the decrease. So because actually they were not, like, okay with this nationalization measures. So the regime, so the only way to get them to collaborate, with the military regime, just to enforce them to do so, to do so. um, and then um, yeah, and again, like, for the first 5-year plan, uh, so they focus on, like, textile and heavy industries like steel, fertilizers, and chemicals, and heavy engineering, like projects. And these, like, industrial projects, managed to create, like 1 million job opportunities for Egyptians, to expand, the labor force. And like the economic growth rate reached 6%. But, like, again, like, the resource gap between, like, the investment and the savings, and again, like, the difficulties in sustaining, financial resources in order to sustain the plan, the 5 year, the second 5-year plan, led to, like, the exhaustion, or like the pushed pushed Nasser or the regime in order to resort to external borrowing, especially from the Soviet Union, between 1965 until 1967. 67. So that's why, and the Soviet Union actually didn't respond, quite well to the demands of, financing, the some of the industrial projects. So it was, like, very difficult for the second plan to get actualized. um, and it was that until, like, the war defeat, Al Nasser actually vested priority in rebuilding, the military, and recovering the territories that were occupied after 1967. And then, like, Sadat reached power, and he had, like, kind of different um, economic orientation. So that's why in 1974 he actually like put October paper to the public, for like a public referendum, in order to stimulate, to offer, more role to the private sector, in order to guarantee, like, economic prosperity, or to achieve economic growth or economic recovery. And it was, like, approved and accepted, by the public. And it actually led the groundwork for future steps of like liquidating, the public sector, and offering more space for private banks or joint ventures, in order to operate freely in the Egyptian economy. So Algeria as well, after, so I'm offering, some examples, and you have more details in the readings. So Algeria as well, after gaining independence in 1962, so the National Liberation Front, we said that in the lecture, like Ahmed Ben Bella actually tried to establish, this kind of self-management, um, like style, of managing the economy. But actually, right after, the departure of the French settlers, the state actually had no option but um, to grab or to seize, these assets. The French companies, that used to develop the country's petroleum and natural gas, so they were nationalized. And the after, like, seizing this, they took serious step of nationalization a few years later. but the state, had control over, the production and marketing and all, like, financing domains. So so Ahmed bin Bella actually embraced, this worker self-management units out of this kind of romantic populism or socialism. So the main target was to 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 actually to offer to give like more space or more role to workers in order to control the operation of the lands or the farms and some industrial units as well. So the state still like owned the farms and the industrial units, but workers had like full control over their operations or how they function. And this actually impeded the emergence of like functioning or like dominant bureaucracy and technocratic apparatuses. So that's why when Ben Bella actually was removed by military coup by Boumediene, when Boumediene actually overthrew Ben Bella. So he ushered in a new policy, or what was called like rational top-down planned development. So that's why like in the first it was like 4-year plan in 1969 till 1973. So he focused on nationalization of the companies to put them under the complete control or the full control of the state, especially for like oil and natural gas. And the main purpose was like these sectors like oil and natural gas, they would offer or they would actually act as like feedstock for modern petrochemical sectors, like how to produce like fertilizers, for example, or the earning from their export, the export of the oil and natural gas. So they might make use of the money or the earning of from their export to pay for another import of capital goods for industrial sectors like steel manufacturers and vehicle assembly. And then like the initial purpose was to modernize or to pay attention to the agricultural sector as well, the products, like to have like some products like fertilizers and tractors for agricultural sector. But like they ended up like neglecting the how to increase the productivity of the agricultural sector, that led to Algeria became one of the major importer of food, that led to food crisis in the late 70s. So like marginalizing like the Boumediene actually marginalized any, or didn't give any role to like private sector, and assigned only like a very limited role to foreign firms in order to provide some sort of technology that would help with these sectors like oil and natural gas. But they didn't have any kind, unlike Egypt and other countries, because Algeria had like oil and natural resources. So actually it had no like financing issue or financial problem to move forward with the second 4-year plan. So rather than like generating more kind of demands for industrial products, it was like during like the second 4-year plan, it was like a general like a decline in agricultural production, especially because they allowed for kind of self-management sectors. So Algeria had to import some of the agricultural inputs, or some of the some its like food like commodities, and some of the industries as well didn't operate in full capacity, and this led to like increase the cost of the operation. So they had to shut down some of the like natural gas, for example, liquefaction, in order to, because of this increasing operational cost, for technical reason. So that's why Shadli bin Jadid, when he reached power after the death of Boumediene, he had to liberalize the economy in order to like to improve on, or to avoid to recover the economy, or to in order to pay attention to the deteriorating sector, and offer more role for private sector for more efficiency, and reducing the operation cost. For Syria and Iraq, for example, um, going back to like the processes of state building, they had like very like experienced like very violent and terrible years because of this struggle for power that led to like great instability, and it actually subsequently it prevented the enactment of any coherent or sustainable development plan. Although like Abdel Karim Qasim, after abolishing the monarchy, he initiated some of this land reform measures, but actually the coup like in 1963, and then another coup in 1968, because of different ideological orientation. Like Qasim was nationalist and Ba'athist, and then so they had like different kind of economic orientation, and it was very difficult to enact like to sustainable top-down the planned economy or development strategy. So they undertook kind of some sort of nationalization measures, especially because they had like they are rich when it comes to oil, but again like mismanagement and the lack of this administrative capacity of the state led to the misallocation of the funding. And again, Iraq like roughly was like in a constant state of war. So like after like this kind of putting an end to this struggle for power, the entered after like few years. So they had a war with the first Gulf War with Iran, and then like Kuwait invasion. So it led to like some devastating economic repercussions, as I mentioned this in some detail when we talked about sectarianism, and how like the wars actually had some economic implications, or financial implications for the state of economy in Iraq. So it actually it was very difficult because of these kind of like it's not special, but they had like in different development trajectory, because they had like different internal circumstances. um, for 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 Syria as well, they spent like ample time struggling for power, until Hafiz al-Assad with the corrective coup reached power, and tried to appease the Sunni merchants somehow, with like without conceding too much, or without allowing for power sharing mechanism. And slowly it took like several years in order to establish it's for the state, or for the Ba'athist regime to establish its full control over the economic activities. So they actually by 1985, the state actually was responsible for roughly like or more than like 60% of the like of the total investment. But still like the manufacturing sector remained very small. So they did account for the manufacturing sector. It did account for 6% of the GDP. But what allowed actually Syria to sustain or to maintain kind of isolation from the global market until like late 1990s, it was like the occupation of Lebanon. So being like physically like occupying Lebanon, it offered like, you know, the some Syrian workers, they worked there and they had to transfer remittances, you know, to the homeland. So that's why it managed, it offered, you know, some rents, you know, for the Syrian economy. Plus, you know, the oil productions were between 1986 and 1995. It offered some room, you know, for to postpone reform or some room for maneuvering for Ba'athist party. And then, like after undertaking even undertaking, you know, this economic reform measures, we're going to talk about this perhaps not next lecture, the one after. Um, when we talk about, you know, the socioeconomic coalitions and we speak of like, you know, the political economy of authoritarianism, so they actually expanded, you know, the socioeconomic coalitions by bringing more like Sunni merchants. But so this economic vulnerability actually fostered the Ba'athist or the Assad regime by offering, you know, somehow of expansion of the social and economic coalition before the uprisings. But at the same time, they didn't have any say in decision making process or in economic policy process. Tunisia, for Tunisia as well, like they didn't have like any kind of domestic entrepreneurial bourgeoisie, but they had like if you remember the process of state building, Ahmed bin Saleh, for example, and the new destroyed party, and Ahmed bin Saleh, you know, the one who presided over, you know, the Tunisian trade union. So the first year, the first 4 year plan marked by this kind of socialist like transformation because of like the imprint of the trade union or the important role in the struggle, you know, for independence within, like, you know, the new Dystop party, where the labor or the trade union played, you know, within the new Dystop party. So they focused on industrialization and agricultural cooperatives, and they took, you know, some after, you know, the first 4 year plan, some tensions, you know, happened, you know, between Bourqiba and the trade union or Ben Saleh, and the regime actually started to undertake some measures to encourage or to stimulate private sector and promote export to European Economic Committee. So the actually they tried to offer some space for the private sector, especially for in the trade sector, but the state is still, like, you know, until 1991, the state accounted for 60% of the value of the manufacturing outputs. But Tunisia suffered, like, was not able to sustain, you know, the functioning or the operation of the state, the public sector, because of, like, you know, the financial burden and the limitation of the offered some space for private sector, but the private investment was very limited to some basic consumer goods and production and tourism. So that's why it was, like, very difficult to sustain, you know, its like a planned economy and the like the same size of the state role in the economy. For the budget, like, you know, according to Kemet here and the Wen book and Waterbury, so the government budget actually the account, the deficit actually reached like 5.5% of the GDP in 1981, and it actually increased to in 5 years to 9%. So the state had to, like, you know, undertake some like serious measures to liberalize the economy and to offer more incentives for the private sector in order to invest or to take, you know, to lead, you know, some industrial sectors. So like because of like the strategy itself and the heavy existence of or involvement of the state in the economic activities, it carried some sort of internal contradictions that it didn't really achieve its initial goals. So the aim to encourage to focus on in industrial sectors or to invest in industrial sectors with a potential of export. But what actually it was like, the product or the industrial products, were kind of rarely internationally competitive. So they didn't really like, they didn't really meet, this demand. So they didn't do that for the purpose of like, exporting, this into the industrial products. And like again, like in Egypt, like reducing the social decrease by reducing um, like the weekly working hours, and kind of lack of like or like, inefficiency, like by focusing on like expanding workforce instead of using some sort of even existing technology. It led to like, it decreased the productivity, and it didn't actually expand, it didn't serve the purpose of expanding, the workforce. Because like, the some of the operations like in Algeria, for example, they didn't utilize, the full capacity. So the projects like, if some of the Algerian like steel plant, for example, they operated only at like 40% of its capacity, and the project had to like, to shut down. And some of the industry, some of the like, industries as well, didn't manage to sustain, their operation. So the strategy or the like the import substitution industrialization had like, twin goals of achieving like social justice by um, like, distributing, ushering in, this far-reaching, the redistribution policies, especially for needy people, and expanding, the workforce, um, and like achieving this national economic independence. And both actually proved elusive because as I mentioned, for the labor force decreasing productivity, and they didn't actually like stopping, the exhaustion of the strategy and inability to expand, or to build more industrial bases. It didn't like, help with the expanding the workforce subsequently. And it led to the agricultural deterioration, and they were not able to secure like, domestic, financial or financing power. So that's why they had to resort to foreign or external borrowing. So instead of achieving, this national economic independence, uh, like they resorted to like, external powers to get, some money to finance their industrial projects. And sometimes, that the strategy entailed kind of multiple goals. So they had to supply, for example, like they had to supply cheap inputs to other industries, and to offer to expand like labor force, or to generate, more job opportunities, and to meet consumer needs. So like supplying like cheap inputs and expanding labor force, they offered like, little incentives to managers of these industries, the public sector industries, to minimize cost, even with the existing, technology, as I mentioned. So they need to expand, the labor force as well, and they need to supply cheap inputs. So some projects, as I mentioned, like, they didn't, utilize, the capacity, and and this increased, the unit cost, and they had to shut down, eventually. And then like the gap between like the gross domestic investment and the gross domestic the saving, like to the investment minus the saving, it led to like the resource gap. It varied again, like with some variation across the region, because like oil export countries, they didn't have like they didn't suffer much, or they didn't suffer at all, from this resource gap. And it created kind of vested interest by creating like new class or like state bourgeoisie that resisted any kind of reform. So they had like the regardless of the economic outcome, so they had like vested interest in perpetuating the same pattern or the same economic planning or the same economic policy, in order to prevent in the any kind of liberalization, or to offer any role to the private sector. So again, like the state had to implement kind of austerity measures that led to more like social upheaval. For example, like the bread rights in Egypt 1977, and in Tunisia in 1978, and then 84, Algeria 1988. So it was like the this kind of exhaustion of import substitution, industrialization, and like this kind of internal contradictions with even like with the existence or the heavy presence of the state. It led to like it pushed the state eventually to roll back, and to minimize social expenditure that actually undermined this social contract between like the people and the post-colonial elites. And this led to some of social disturbance or social instability. So the government had to, or these kind of regimes had to deal with them. So they had like to undertake some economic reform measures by like and they varied like the but like actual steps generally as a pattern were taken by mid 90s, like in Turkey, early actually 80s, sorry. So Turkey in 1983, and then Tunisia and Morocco by like in the like the mid 1985, in 1985. So they had to undertake some serious steps to liberalize the economy and to allow for market mechanisms to operate. So another issue, like so we talked about the role of the state and the rise and fall of the state-led development model. So another important, like, and this like the exhaustion of the import substitution industrialization that like actually led to like this distorted development trajectory, and the failure of sustaining economic growth. So it actually we had like a different issue regarding to the defense expenditure or the existence of the military as um, one of the like the central actor in the ruling coalitions of the post-colonial state. Because like as I mentioned, in Tunisia, in Algeria, or in Egypt, so some of these like some of the leaders, some of the post-colonial leaders, actually they hail from the military establishment. So they so being like central component, or looking into the composition of the ruling coalition, so it actually they played important role in allocating resources, or like the financial resources. Because like in order to like to allocate resources, it was like, or it's usually a process of like different conflict of interest. So being like one or central actor in the ruling coalition, so they would like struggle for gaining more financial resources. And this actually triggered, some debates about the development trajectory or the development strategy, whether or not, this military expenditure, or like, the allocation of, like, some of the financial resources, or like, the to allocate, certain amount of the budget, to the military establishment, whether or not, first of all, whether or not, this would like would have like crowding out effect. So instead of, like, diverting, this kind of scarce resources to social welfare programs or social policies, so the actually transferred or allocated, the regimes actually allocated this to the military. But again, like, it's kind of, nothing is conclusive, like, even in the like, according to the readings, and I refrain from, like, making any kind of causal inference here. But it's a debate, but it was not, like, it was not conclusive. Like, there are no, like, mechanisms, like, saying that, like, decreasing, this kind of reducing, this defense expenditure would subsequently, like, lead to increase of the social welfare, or like, infrastructure. um, but again, like, it's kind of a trade-off, like, to allocate these resources to, without, like, saying whether or not it would have, like, a repercussion for, like, the development choices or the development trajectories. um, so, like, with numbers here, so you have, like, the, like, in Egypt, for example, or Lebanon, Morocco. So the military expenditure, or the allocation, for resources for the military, actually, they are not, like, that higher in comparison to the amount allocated for education, for example. But cross-regional perspective is still, like, the MENA region still, like, had, like, the highest, average military expenditure. So perhaps because of, like, they had, like, Saudi Arabia and Israel and UAE. So perhaps, like, with different variations, in the region, that, like, made, this kind of difference between the MENA region, to in comparison to other regions. And here you have, like, by country as well, like, the average, military expenditure. So again, like, you have Saudi Arabia 30%, Turkey 13, and Israel, the three, like, major countries that allocated, some of the, as percentage of the GDP, to the military spending. And then, like, like, historical records, of war and conflict, how this would affect, the like, the flows of, they had, like, different dynamics, like, they affected the flows of foreign resources and military aid. And these kind of military aids or financial resources were never used for non-military development purposes. So they had to allocate this for arms sales deals, for example, or and this actually cemented, the ruling coalition. So they had, like, vested interest in getting or gaining, this kind of military aid, and to make, these kind of deals. And this actually fostered the ruling coalition, the existing one. So, like, you have, like, some in the region, like, you have professionalized, military, like Egypt, for example, or Tunisia. But you have as well, like, less professionalized military, where, like, they give, like, some place or key space for like, patrimonial ties with the ruler, in order to sustain their power. So again, like, the military, whether, like, professional or less professional, So they were part, or they have been, part of the political settlements, like, the ruling coalition. So they had, like, this kind of elite bargaining, how to establish and stabilize the regime. And actually like they were, like, in some countries, like in Syria and Iraq, for example. So they had, like, more kind of ethnic component, or communal ties. And in the Gulf countries, they had this kind of like familial cronyism, or like, the familial family ties. So in Syria, for example, so they had, this minority, the Alawites, or the Alawi minorities. They occupied, the top hierarchy, or the top position in the military. And this religious and ethnic ties actually have been, like, central component of like cementing the ruling coalition in Syria. In Iraq, like, it was like a decree, coming from like the region of Saddam, was like that, they happened to be Sunni as well. So that was like the main component of the like the communal ties between that actually brought together um, or strengthened the ruling coalition. It actually it was like quite the opposite after the invasion. And Noor al-Malki actually depended on the Shia, and marginalized and alienated the Sunni in the military. And they reformed, the ruling coalition in the Gulf monarchies. So some members of the I mentioned this before. So some members of the royal families actually, they occupied, the position of the Minister of Defense. So they had full control over, like, commanding like key units in the armed forces. And this would, like, the being from, like, the it's not like sufficient condition, but this would, like, guarantee kind of legality, and would reduce, any probability of undertaking military coups against the king, or the royal family. And in Jordan, for example, Hussein, when he, like, like his throne as well was dependent heavily on the support of the, like, mainly and largely the support of the Bedouin Jordan Legion. So it was like, the military, generally speaking, like has been, like, like one important or central component in the ruling coalition. And in some countries, like, they had, like, this ethnic and family ties. The even, like, the military was even linked to the ruling the ruling elite. Was, like, some sort of patrimonial network that actually like requested, kind of more kind of distribution of some benefits and some economic materials, and getting access to some like lucrative, economic sectors or economic deals. So except for Bahrain, that actually the royal family, or like Al Khalifa. So they had, like, some sectarian and tribal identity as well, that determine the composition of the military. You mentioned, I mentioned before, like, the Sunni minority that actually controlled or ruled the Shia majority. So that's why he depended on not only on, so the Al Khalifas, they depended only on Sunni for like to have, like, the higher position in the military. And the family actually depended on some Sunni mercenaries as well, especially from Pakistan, in order to bolster, the military as well. So, like, so the military expenditure, or, like, the historical record of war and conflict that led to, like, massive flows of foreign resources that, like, allocated for never allocated for non-military development policies or purposes, and then like being like the main or like one of the like the most important component of the ruling coalition. This actually affected like policy choices and development trajectories and the distribution of material benefits as well. Like military as well, they had like they had their own like industrial projects and what's called like military industrial complex. So they had like kind of lucrative, or they had access to civilian economic sector, or like they had their own like economic projects and service providing sectors as well in telecommunication or advanced technology most especially. And the pioneer and they had like their own properties and financial institutions and their productive assets. So Turkey as well like was kind of a pioneer. So the military played important role, or they had like a large share in manufacturing and assembling, and some heavy kind of military industries like missiles and tank guns. And they allowed some of the private industrial conglomerates to enter or to manufacture this kind of missiles as well. Uh, so they had like kind of powerful economic sectors or enclaves in these countries that affected as well like the allocation of resources or the functionality of the private sector. um and like they have like in Turkey for example, they had like their own business in industrial and agricultural and financial sectors, in Egypt as well. So they had like some economic body, the national service products organizations that focus mainly on public infrastructure projects and the manufacturing of some consumer goods. And they had like basically construction and telecommunication. They focus mainly on like some sectors like construction and telecommunication, and in addition to food production. So this like allowed the military in different countries to let like to let some kind of lucrative contracts to private firms. And in Sudan for example, they under Numeri. So the military actually the military corporations, they were allowed, or the regime actually allowed military corporations to secure kind of privileges and some other like important position or in the private sector. um, and that was like some sort of like to what extent we explain like the eruption or the outbreak of the uprisings, like the this kind of distorted development strategy and the legacy of this patron client and this new patrimonial or the patrimonial relationship between specific elites or sectors, and like the reduction or like the inefficient this kind of social, with some variation in the region again, because perhaps like the Gulf countries they are much more efficient when it comes to the social and like the social policies and to meet like people's demands, to whether or not like to improve on like the human development indicators or to buy their acquiescence. But anyhow, like they, especially after the failure of the import substitution industrialization and this and then moving towards like market reform measures and the creation of what's called, or the like the institutionalization of what's called like crony capitalism, with the existence of kind of well-connected private sector elites, that they had like kind of connections with the elites, or the state elites, and they had like kind of preferential treatment, like access to credit and some other like privileges. So this kind of dynamics of capitalist development led to alienation or de-alignment of the middle class because of this like blatant nepotism and corruption. So one of the like explanation of the uprisings, like this kind of like erosion of this social contract and the defection of the middle class, and this led to like pushed some societal actors that they were like came from outside the ruling the elite circle, in order to push the elite circle or the ruling elites to have another kind of bargains, or another initially they thought about forcing them to have like another social bargain. And the main like the socioeconomic demands were obvious in the course of the uprisings. But again, like because like putting aside the reasons or the political economy explanation of the uprisings, so the active role of the military like was there, and actually it actively shaped the outcome in some countries. So in Syria, for example, like they like paying attention to this like ethnic and communal ties would help with explaining the why like the country like was descended actually into this brutal and prolonged civil war. And like in Egypt and Tunisia, for example, how like the army played like important role in overthrowing Mubarak first, and then ousting the Brotherhood affiliated president. And in Tunisia, for example, they had like kind of neutral stand. And you can like refer it back to like the legacy of the state building, and some without like establishing any kind of mechanisms or causality. Again, this kind of economic role of the military establishment in the region, in some countries. Okay, so next time I'll talk about this crony capitalism. I'll talk more about. So we haven't finished, the crony capitalism. So I'm going to finish this, and we're going to talk. I'm going to talk about the Gulf, and then lecture 3. I'm going to bring together like different threads and try to link, development with the regime type. Okay, so see you on Thursday. Bye.